My name is Rabbi Bert Visotsky. I am the director of the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue here at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I welcome all of you here in the Women's League Seminary Synagogue, and I especially welcome those of you who are live streaming on your computers or phones or whatever your devices are at home. We will also be posting the video of this so you can have the opportunity to watch it again and again. I say that because even though you're here and you're going to have the experience, you are going to want to relive it. I know this because tonight is going to be the third, maybe fourth time I will have heard Leymah speak, and I am continually inspired. My job is to set the evening running. When you came in, you may have seen at your seat or the seat next to you an index card and a small golf pencil. If you wish, you can record your golf score. But you can also, during the course of the lecture, which is going to be then followed by a little bit of discourse with Ruth Messenger, you can write down your questions, and we will collect your questions at the end. I'll sort through them, and Ruth will then pose them to Leymah so that you have the opportunity to also engage from the audience. This is the John Paul II Lecture for Interfaith Understanding. We are co-hosts with the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome, and we do this with the gracious help of the Russell Berry Foundation. And we're very grateful that Angelica Berry is here with us, and some of the staff members are here. We really couldn't do it without them, and they are a visionary organization. I know that my boss, my friend, my teacher, the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, will also want to put in his 2 cents of thanks. So let me invite Chancellor Arnold Eisen, please.
Thank you, Bert. Thank you again for organizing this latest in a series of wonderful events. It's my honor also to welcome everyone to this evening's John Paul II lecture, and especially to welcome our speaker and honored guest, Leymah Gbowee, and her longtime friend and our friend, Ruth Messenger, who will be introducing Leymah Gbowee in just a few moments. Ruth, as you all know, was the longtime head of American Jewish World Service, still is global ambassador, and I'm thrilled to say this year has been inspiring JTS faculty, students, and staff directly through her work as the first JTS Finkelstein Institute Social Justice Fellow. I also want to thank Angelica Berry and the Berry Foundation for helping to sponsor this evening, as well as the John Paul II Center of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. It's great to have you as our partners now, as always. We pride ourselves here at JTS in training future leaders, and I'm happy that some of our students are here this evening, in training future leaders who draw on the tradition and the history of Judaism and the Jewish community, and help guide communities through difficult terrain, often uncharted terrain, both personal and collective. And what we hope that they will do, what we try to inspire them to do, is to speak the voice of God and the voice of Torah to the world, boldly and compassionately. We've just read last week a double Torah portion, 2 sections from the book of Leviticus, which has the title Acharei Mot and Kedoshim. And I say a word about this double portion because it's especially relevant to our speaker this evening. So Acharei Mot, the first part of that title, means after the death. In the first case, after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron. And Kedoshim means be holy. And this, I think, is a profound lesson for all of us, certainly for Jews 70 years after the Holocaust, but for all human beings. How does one live? What does one do in response to incredible death and suffering? And Leymah Gbowee has taught a lesson about that brilliantly in her writings and, more importantly, in her actions. Responding to a 14-year-long civil war in which about 250,000 people were killed. She and other women, whom she calls ordinary, organized the Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace campaign in 2003. Talk about responding with holiness to massive death. In the face of suffering, acting to mitigate suffering. In the face of injustice, acting to do justice. In the face of cruelty, acting with compassion. And when she gave her Nobel Prize address a few years ago, she captured, or tried to capture, some of what was in her mind and the minds of the other women who participated in this campaign. And I, by way of introducing Ruth Messenger, who will introduce Leymah Gbowee, just want to quote one sentence or two from this Nobel Prize address that just jumped out at me and seemed to me a perfect embodiment of the message of how to be holy after mass death. Here are her words. We work daily confronting warlords, meeting with dictators, and refusing to be silenced in the face of AK-47 and RPGs. We walked when we had no transportation. We fasted when water was unaffordable. We held hands in the face of danger. We spoke truth to power when everyone else was being diplomatic. We stood under the rain and the sun with our children to tell the world the stories of the other side of the conflict. It's a great honor for me to introduce Ruth Messenger, who will introduce Leymah Gbowee. Ruth?
Just before my teacher, my rabbi, Ruth Messenger, introduces Leymah, my colleague and program coordinator, Michael Bueno, who's going to raise his hand now embarrassedly, who's about to become a rabbi in the next 2 weeks. He reminds me that we are at an interfaith event, and so I am going to invite you all to take part in one of the great new interfaith rituals. Please silence your cell phones.
Thank you, Bert. Thank you, Arnie. And thank you in 1,000 different ways for 1,000 different pieces of work and words of commitment to Leymah Gbowee. So it's very special for me to be here. The people who introduced me, Bert and Arnie, don't tell you the big secret of my life, which is that I am the Finkelstein Institute Social Justice Fellow at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is where my mother worked for 55 years. So for me, this is sort of an extraordinary wraparound piece of life, and it means a great deal to me to be here. I would really say fairly to be here again, since I used to be the take your daughter to work before the program existed. That said, a word about the framing of this evening, and then an opportunity to introduce you to a very, very special person. So I'm repeating a little bit, but welcome to the live streamers. I'm going to introduce Leymah, and she's going to talk. I said to her, I might say some things about what I hope you'll say, but I know you'll say whatever you want, and that's because you're Leymah Gbowee, so that's what she'll do. And then Leymah and I will sit down in front, and I'll ask her some further questions, but I also hope that you'll be thinking about questions that you would like to ask, because in addition to everything else that Leymah Gbowee is, she's an unbelievably warm, loving, relational person. And there are very few, my sense is there are very few world social change agents, and probably even fewer Nobel Peace Prize winners who have the humanity and the soul and the spirit that you will see and that I urge you to engage with. So a piece of background. American Jewish World Service, which is now run by my distinguished friend and colleague Robert Bank, was much smaller 18 or 19 years ago, but has always had a smart program staff who had their ear, based in New York, who had their ear to the ground around the world. And relatively early in my tenure, they told me about this woman. And they told me about this woman, Leymah Gbowee, who had, I want to be clear about this, single-handedly, Leymah and I and Robert agree, AJWS agrees, nobody does anything single-handedly. But she had single-handedly mobilized and organized across faith lines the women of Liberia to stop the Civil War successfully. And the story, and it may be a bit apocryphal, I'm not sure, but Leymah says that when people in Liberia were saluting her and thanking her, and when world press was congratulating her on what she had done, several people said, this was an extraordinary effort, Madam Bowie, which is how they call her, and now you can go and take care of your children. At that point, she had 4 or 5 children. She now, with various adoptions, has, I think, 9 children. But I want you to hear that in the context of a gender issue for a minute, because it was now go take care of your children, as if she hadn't been concerned about and caring for them while she was organizing to make peace, and as if she hadn't seen that making peace was the single most important thing she could do for her children. But it was also a remark, as I heard it repeated to me, and as Leymah said it, which was like, okay, you've done something good, but we actually see you. You're a leader, you're a troublemaker, you delight in stirring things up, so go home. And according to the AJWS staff who had met Leymah, she said some version, and she'll be happy to correct me, of, no, I'm actually not going home, because what we've done here is what needs to happen around the world, because women and girls have a particular capacity to find each other across lines of difference and to make peace. And what I want is the funding to do that, not only in Liberia, but with women from my part of Africa, from the rest of Africa, from the rest of the world, who ought to be the peacemakers for the 21st century. It's to the extraordinary, articulate, and powerful commitment of Leymah to this work, and to the thanks of some AJWS program staff, that was when we funded her. And I'll tell you more about Leymah in 1 minute, but if you want the clearest notion of what kind of person this is, when I was, I'm sure, watching late night television, I have no idea what hour of the day it was, but I read that the Nobel Peace Prize had been awarded to Leymah Gbowee. I fired off an email that said, oh my God, congratulations. And she fired back an email. God knows what she was doing at that moment, but she didn't need to write an email back, and she said, part of this Nobel Peace Prize belongs to American Jewish World Service. So I'm going to ask Leymah to come up in a minute. I'm going to ask her to tell you whatever part of her story she wants. She has an extraordinary story which is in the book, which I commend to all of you, Mighty Be Our Powers, that talks about the original work she did and the ways in which she mobilized women to stop the war. She has the story of everything she's done since then, including now being really an international in-demand person. Robert will back me up to say that every time we ask Leymah to speak someplace, she's flying 4,000 miles from someplace else to come and do it, and we particularly value that. But I hope that in talking, and if Leymah, if you don't do this now, then I'll ask you when we're sitting in front, but that she'll give us some notion of her current focus, some notion of her long-haul commitment to social change work and how she's sustained that level of energy, and that she'll do something that is very much needed now, and that is to give all of us some advice and guidance for the need to continue to make change and pursue justice. So with that, I present to you a woman of vision, a woman of determination, and my highest compliment, as some of you know, a woman of extraordinary moral courage, Leymah Gbowee.
Thank you, Ruth. If anyone knows me, I speak best when I do not use paper, but Bert, you intimidated me so much with all of your demands for, can I have a rating paper, that I have a rating paper, but this is no guarantee that I will read it. I'm really and truly honored to be here tonight, and I would like to say thank you, Bert, and to the president for having me here. The first time I was invited, I said to him, you're taking a serious risk bringing this troublemaker into your seminary. And he says, okay, you can make trouble. I don't think they'll fire me. So I stirred up a little bit. And I have a friend in Nigeria who says to me, every time you go and you cause trouble, they call you back. So I want to also thank Ruth and Robert again, and members of this community for the long time support to my work. And Ruth, when I say to people that, just this afternoon I was telling someone I'm fiercely loyal to those who I call my family and friends. And if you find yourself in that, so certain people will say, there are certain people who are Leymah's whisperer. In New York, Ruth is one of those people. So if you need her, just talk to Ruth Messenger, or talk to Concepcion Alva, or talk to Abby Disney, or talk to, so I'm surrounded as an African woman with all of these white people from different places, I mean it in a good way, who are my whisperers. So I'm really happy for the relationship, and now with Robert taking over. So many years ago, in Liberia, a story was told to me that actually set me on my journey to experience nonviolence. So we were in this village and doing this training, and someone, the professor, or whoever we call them, the trainer said to us, everyone tell us a local story about nonviolence. And this young lady from a village who had come to do the training with, I was part of the training, also said, in her village, one of their young men left and went to town and came back a few years later with a wife. She was from a totally different ethnic group. They had no cultural similarities. So in our culture, I'm from the Pele ethnic group. We are the largest ethnic group in Liberia. But if you're from the north, for example, my husband's ethnic group, they are our nephews. So they used to have these joking relationship to sustain peace. So, and then you have the Kisi and the Bandis and different groups. So in that group, between our ethnic group, about 5 or 6 ethnic groups, share this joking relationship of uncle and nephew and nieces. But this girl came into this ethnic group in marriage, but she was not from any of the tribes that held that relationship. So there was like no quote-unquote loyalty to protect her. And she and her husband came, and they were in the village. And the people were just happy that their son was back and that he had a wife. It was an added treat. And then a few weeks later, they noticed that something was definitely wrong. This woman was being beaten by their son. And the women in the village got very uncomfortable. They went to the male chief and said, this is not us. And and they went to the female chief, and the female chief said, let's take it with the men. And they went to the men and they said, well, you know, she's from a different ethnic group. Probably her socialization was not really good. We treat you all well. You are women. We're from the same ethnic group. She's from a different ethnic group, so she probably deserves it. So one day, he beat her so badly and broke her leg. The women got up and went to the chief and said, we've been talking to you to do something about this, our son and brother, and you've refused to do that. So tomorrow, we're going on a strike. And in these different traditions, they have what they call the secret society. So the women have their secret society, and the men have their secret society. And each secret society have a special place that they gather. And if the women gather at their secret place, the men cannot go there because they are not members. So the women told the chief, we're going to our secret society, and we will not come out until something is done about this violence. The chief laughed and said it's not going to last for an hour. 5 a.m., all of the women and young girls who were at the age where they could do some work went into the secret society. By 6 a.m., the men realized that no one had waken them up for hot water to take their bath. By 7 a.m., there was no smell of breakfast coming underneath the window. There was the doors and every part of their house. By 8 a.m., babies begin to be uncomfortable because they had not taken their bath. And they laughed and said, well, they will soon hear their babies crying and they will come out because that's what mothers do. By 9 a.m., the babies were really crying and the mothers were coming nowhere. By 10 a.m., it was getting very serious because then the toddlers added their cry to it. By 11, they realized that this is a mess. And by 12 noon, the men went to the chief, and then they started accusing this young man. You came and destroyed the peace of our community with your new ways. And then the chief, you have been such a weak leader because if you had taken a stand a long time ago, we wouldn't be at this place. So then they sent word back to the women that they wanted to negotiate. And the women came back with their non-negotiable position, that this is what we want. No one will beat a woman in this village, and there will be no impunity for domestic violence. Tonight, I would like you to join me as I speak to you briefly on the theme, Mighty Be Our Powers. I often travel globally, and most times when I get to places, I always get this one question. Is there hope for our world? Is it ever going to get better? Is there going to be any change in the status quo? Can we ever find peace? And if you look around us, we're plagued by war and discrimination, racism, and many more. Today, in many communities, including this country, if you decide to stand up for your values and your principles, you become the black sheep. Our world has been turned upside down. Truth is now a lie, and lies are now truth. Evil is now good, and good has become the new evil. Everything is distorted. In Liberia in 2003, a group of us got together and decided we wanted to do something to end the war. We wanted to change the way life was. We wanted to change everything about everything that we had been experiencing. We were 7. And we sat in an office where the decks had a huge hole from bullets. All of the chairs were propped on a block of bricks, different bricks. The men were on the other side having a serious civil society meeting, and we were on one side having our own meeting. And as we engaged in conversations, one after the other ideas started to flow from us. Those of us who had never done protests in our lives only knew about nonviolence through the stories that we just told you and through reading King or Gandhi. None of us had been involved in any of these things. Someone said, let's do a statement. Statement. This is under Charles Taylor. This is a man who had gone on radio a few weeks earlier to say, even if my mother protested, my government flogged the hell out of her. So obviously there was no room, but we decided let's do a statement. So we sat down and wrote this statement enthusiastically. And then when we came to the end of the statement, someone asked us, so how do we publish this? And then one woman reached out into her purse and said, this is my last spare $10 US. So she put it on the table. And they said, oh yes, we know this female journalist. Her name is Janet. Let's call her. Fortunately for us, Janet was in the neighborhood. She came. So she read the statement, went through it, and then said to us, so if we publish this, who wrote this? And then someone said, the women of Liberia. We said, isn't that fraudulent? We're 7. How can we claim to be the women of Liberia? So we sat down and took one of the most difficult decisions of our lives, that we would name ourselves in that statement. And of course, I had to be the first. And so we all signed that statement and sent it out. The next day, every local media outlet wanted to see who these 7 brave women were. Why would you put yourself in this position? Because everything in that statement that we wrote were things that the government had said they were not going to do. Immediate unconditional ceasefire, a dialogue between the warring parties, and the deployment of an intervention force. Ceasefire, held no, we'll fight till the last soldier die. Dialogue, no, I'm a sovereign government, I can never sit with rebels. Intervention force, held no, Liberia is a sovereign state, and any intervention force will be seen as an occupation. So these 3 things was what the government was saying we're not going to do, and those were the 3 things that we put into the newspapers, and we named ourselves. After we did that, they started coming. The next time we invited a few women, so the group went from 7 to about 20-something, from 20-something to 65, 65 to 250, 250 to 2,500 on one day. $10, sheer will, not even understanding what we were getting involved in. We launched what we called the Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace campaign. Einstein once said, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch without doing anything. And so when we decided that we wanted to do, it was because we did not want to be those group of people who were not doing anything. Let me take you on a journey about where we were as a nation. Kids would be going to school, like walking down Manhattan, and a pickup truck would stop and pick every one of them in there and throw them in the back. Take them to a place where 1 hour later they will be taught to shoot an AK-47. And then they'll send them to the war front. Women we were toys of war. Rape and abuse was the order of the day. So when we started doing this work, it was virtually saying we were signing our own death warrant. We want to die, or we must die. But when people ask me, what was the drive? Because once we unveiled the movement with 2,500 women, we started protesting daily, sitting in the sun. We became a sight for sore eye to the government. We were a political embarrassment to the international community. We were everything to everyone, and the international journalists who came called us pathetic. But we were determined, regardless of whatever name you call us, we were determined to make a difference. From picketing to sit-ins, the U.S. Embassy became our playground. Because when we were not happy about what we heard, we went there. 2 times the ambassador came up, next time the counselor came up, other times I bet they were sending us interns. But we never stopped going, we never stopped pushing, and we never lost faith in the fact that we, with our sheer will, could change the tide in Liberia. During the Second World War, a group of women decided they were going to The Hague to protest. These women went, and they were from 3 different categories of countries. Those that were winning the war, those that were losing the war, and those that had nothing to do with the war. The ones that countries were not being affected and impacted primarily by the war said in their writing in the book Women at The Hague that their consciences could not allow them to sit in their countries and not come to protest. But also that they were taking huge risks, political and personal risks, because their relations back in their countries were questioning, why do you want to get involved? Then you had the ones who were winning the war, who were now being called traitors by their countries. Why are you going to The Hague? And then you had the ones who were losing the war. They were the ones who had all the more reason to be there. But when they got there, they said, we do not call this gathering a gathering for peace. We call it an assembly of women with similar focus, that what we have together is more than what we have against each other. And that peace is important. Last 2 years, this 2015, WILF, the Women League for Peace and Freedom, celebrated 100 years of the women at The Hague. And that was when I started reading. I did the unveiling of the bust of Bertha von Suttner at the Peace Palace in The Hague. And the Peace Palace had been in existence for 100 years, and that was the first time a woman bust was unveiled. You have King, you have Gandhi, you have Mandela, you have everyone, but that was the first time. So reading the statement, the issue after that conference, you would think that you were reading a statement in today's world. So these women came and said, one of the things that brought us here is because even the soldiers who are wounded and lying down in the hospitals were saying to them, we don't understand why we are fighting. Can't the women do something? And those who were seen as the powerful were the ones who were now asking the seemingly powerless, can't you change this? And for us in Liberia, that was what we heard when we started the protest, the silent cries of the fighters. One of the days we had gone to protest, when President Taylor sent for us, over 2,500 women showed up. And so 3 of us walked down to the guards. And the guards said, well, yes, they told us that you people are coming today. And he was obviously very annoyed. But they said, if you're less than 25, we shouldn't allow you to enter. I said, so what if we are more than 25? And he looked at me and smirked. Like, you know, everyone is afraid of Taylor. Who would take a risk with someone like you to come here? And he said, well, if you're more than 25, then come. So I said, really? He said, yes. Stayed there, whipped out my phone, and told the women form a line. So they were across the street at the University of Liberia. And then I said, start coming. But there was this young man sitting there in a chair, and we all knew him to be one of the most notorious fighters, but he did not have on uniform. And apparently he was being taken to prison because he had gotten to the place where he said he was tired killing human beings, and he was not killing one more soul again, that the government should kill him. So as the women were coming, he asked me to come close to him, and then he said, you people cannot stop, because you are the hope for people like us who are tired fighting. But the soldier who was annoyed, when he saw the sea of white coming down, he was like, wow, these people are really serious. But when the powerless, or seemingly powerless, find that thing inside to change the tide, no one can stop them. So the questions that we get asked, is there hope for our world? The answer is a resounding yes. But the question that I would ask us in this room tonight, who's going to answer to the police brutality in this country? Who's going to answer to racism and sexism? Who's going to answer to all of the different negativity that we see coming out of here? The religious intolerance. Who's going to answer to all of those things? Who's going to answer to the rising wave in this century, where women have no right over their bodies, that every conversation concerning women's reproductive health and rights is held by men in suits. Who's going to stand up and challenge that? Who's going to stand up and speak for Syria, a place where people have died, and today the war is no longer about democracy and governance and what they want to do, but it has become the playground for powerful nations trying to show the strength of one another. Who's going to stand up for South Sudan, Africa's newest republic, where famine has hit and rape and abuse is the order of the day? Who's going to stand up for Venezuela? That country that does not necessarily fit into the regular conflict context, but famine, but hunger and medical problems and all of the different things. Chaos is the order of the day. Yesterday, I've begun to push my fellow laureates for us to say something about Venezuela. So I've been getting all of these videos from activists around, and today was called a protest, but it was supposed to be a protest where the young people were using human feces as their bomb because they did not have the ammunition. So they take human feces and animal feces and put them together in jars. Someone showed me a video of it, and that's what they used to throw at the soldiers in protest. Who's going to stand up? Who's going to stand up for girls' education? This is a question that we need to answer. And many times when I speak to students at different universities, when they ask me, how do you know what it is that you're supposed to work on? My response to them is that thing that keeps you awake at night. The one that you cannot shake off, whether it's girls' education or sexual and reproductive health and rights or LGBTQ rights, whatever it is, if it is that thing that keeps you turning and turning and turning, it is that thing that you have to step into. I like to call myself an interferer because I think that's the reason God put me on the earth. But I also think that this is the only way that we can change the world. The bystanding attitude has not done us very well. We need to step into spaces and into places and do things that will change the tide. A few years ago, I went to Texas, and a little girl came to me and said, Miss Gbowee, when you come to these places, are you amazed at the large buildings? You know, sometimes dressing like this fool a lot of people. Because sometimes they ask me, how did you learn English so well? And I'm like, duh. Or do you know this thing? And I'm like, seriously? You know, so are you amazed at the large buildings? And I said to her, no, little one. I'm amazed at what is beneath those large buildings. The depth of homelessness and hunger and poverty in the midst of a lot. I never look up. I'm always looking down to find something to think about and get angry about, because that's the fuel that I need to do the work that I do. We need to step outside and get involved. So in looking around and looking beneath, I've seen different things, you know, in different places. I've told this story about 100 times, but I'll still tell it to you tonight. So I came to New York first as a distinguished activist in residence at Barnard College. And so one of the days I'm going downtown to do a meeting, and I'm dressed like this. So I say I moved to New York with all of my Africanness, my nosiness, the mother in me, my sassiness, and everything. So I'm going downtown, and I see 3 black boys going into a nail salon. I stopped. Interesting. Young men, age of my children. And then they came out of the nail salon with a pair of flip-flops. Even more interesting. And they were going this way. My meeting is this way. I went back that way. Typical African woman. I followed those boys. and was amazed at what I saw. In the days of being black, and as a young man being seen as a thug, in these days of every other negative thing that you can think about, there was this old man, white, not Hispanic. I've been to this country long enough to know Hispanic from white and every other thing, white, trying to move from point A to point B, but his flip-flops were broken. And these 3 black boys noticed, went into a store, bought him a pair of flip-flops, and offered it to him. By the time they turned to leave, I ran to hug them. They were like, whoa. And then I said to them, I saw what you all did. And I'm very proud. And I'm going to claim you all as my nephews. But thank you. Very late for my meeting, I'm walking and thinking, how many of us who could afford more than a flip-flop passed by that man and did not stop? How many of us who say we're careful or we do have care about race and race relationship, how many of us activists passed and did not look? How many of us, and I couldn't stop asking how many, and then I couldn't stop asking myself, how many opportunities have I missed to give someone hope in the world again? Because you see, when we talk about how mighty our power is, it's not just about changing from war to peace. It's not just about doing heavy advocacy. Your power is mighty, and this is where we're called when you're able to give someone hope in humanity again. Your power is mighty when you're able to let someone know that racism is not the order of the day. Your power is mighty. So when you ask, is there hope? Yes. How can we? The question is, how can you, in your own little way, walk up to someone and say hi? I went to a school somewhere, a university, and the kids were there all pumped up about the religious ban and how they were protesting at the airports. And they were doing this and doing that, and they wanted to show me that they were great and they were mighty and their powers were mighty. And I asked them, do we have Iranian students on this campus? And they, yeah. Do we have Iraqis? Yes. So name all the 6 nations. How many of you are friends with any of them? No one could speak. How do you protest the larger injustice when you've never made anyone feel welcome? How different are you from the people who are saying, don't come here? You're much of a hypocrite because you say, come here, but I will not speak to you. You're not in my class, you're not. So when our power is mighty, what we're called to do in a world loaded by negativity is to bring people closer to believing again in the common humanity of all of us. A few years back, I was coming to the US with my daughter, who was about 18 months at the time, who's about 7 now. And we got off a United flight to my most dreaded airport, DC. And by the time we got there, they sent us into the small room. Have you been to the small room? No. Interesting small room. When you enter that small room, you know the mind of people. And you know those who racism impact in this country. Because in that small room, you see people dressed like me. People with turbans, long beards, people from Eastern Europe and Those are the people. So you can just easily profile those who will be in that small room. So we get there at 6 a.m. By that time, 18 months, 3 words, leave me alone. That's all she could say. But mothers were clinging on to their babies because they did not want to offend the Homeland Security people. So I sat there holding tightly to mine, forgetting that an activist DNA ran in her blood. And all I could hear was, leave me alone. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. And I started getting a headache from leave me alone. So I put her down. And the other mothers in the room looked at me like, are you kidding me? She got down, ran, and wrapped herself in the American flag. Lie on the floor and open up her legs. And then one of the Homeland Security guy was coming. She got up, ran, and gave him a big hug. In 5 minutes, I heard, Leymah Gbowee? And I said, yes. Handed me my passport and said, welcome to America. I said, girlfriend, you did it for me. Again, after that moment, I'm thinking, what is the lesson here? And this baby was saying, I see your humanity. You're tired. You probably have kids that you want to go to. Do you see mine? I just got off a 10-hour flight. I see that you're powerful. But with a little bit of kindness, our power is mighty. The stories that I've told you all tonight all points to people who were seemingly powerless coming together to change the tide. The women in that village realized and recognized that violence in one home that is tolerated is going to be violence in every home in the future. For us in Liberia, it wasn't about us changing the tide to get jobs. It was about what legacies we were leaving for our children. What could we tell them in the future when they ask us about our engagement during the war? For the women at The Hague, they said, all we're looking to do is to make war an impossibility. We're not doing anything to end this current crisis. We're doing everything to make sure we don't go down the road we've gone down. Today, we all have some form of power, and we can all use it for the greater good of our world. King was ordinary. Gandhi was ordinary. Dr. King had his flaws and his faults. I am no hero. I'm just an interferer. Those 3 boys didn't have a lot, but they had the eyes for humanity and the heart for giving. If we put all of the different skills of each and every one of us together, the end result will be a mighty power that will change our world from evil to good and bring us closer to peace, justice, and equality. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Leymah. She and I have done this on podiums, we've done this in restaurants, we've done this over late night drinks, and she gets better all the time. Thank you. Leymah's told you all what we need to do, both in how we see the world and in how we act, so I'm going to leave that for a wrap-up and go back a little bit. So you talked about the amazing story of the 7 women. But one of the things that was special about it was that among the women that you reached out to, you reached out through a faith connection. The first time I think that Christian and Muslim women had connected with each other at all. But how did that occur to you and the other women? How did that work? And what was the process of actually getting together women who at least had established distance from each other?
Well, when we started, we did not start as the mass action. So going back further, we started with the Christian Women's Organization that I founded. And one day, the World Council of Churches brought a delegation to Liberia, and we went to make a presentation. Afterwards, the Muslim women came and said, you know, we saw what you've done with the Christian women, we want to start something. So they went and gathered their women and eventually came back to me and said, come and teach us. So I had to go every Friday after their prayers to tell them, this is how you organize. So in a sense, I was the one preparing them for their own kind of, you know, and then you need to find an ally within the mosque, one of the religious leaders who's going to endorse your work. So I guided them for a long time. And then one day we decided to do something called a Peace Outreach Project. So we brought both groups together to go into the communities to engage women with, you can do peace work, you can engage. Politics is not just for men because we have a culture of it's the people's thing. And that people's thing means that elections, governance, and everything belongs to only the men. It's a male domain. So women should stay out of it. So we wanted to change that culture of it's the people's thing into a culture of it's our thing. We did that work for 9 months in markets, in mosques, in churches. And then once we completed it, we decided to sit down and evaluate the work. We realized that there were issues between both Christian and Muslim women that we needed to trash out. But also within faith groups, and since we're at the Jewish seminary, there are a lot of issues with women because our faith has all of these negative socialization, disempowering verses that some of the people who are afraid of themselves use to keep women down. So I personally wanted to, and so I'm not a favorite person in my church. In Liberia, I'm a troublemaker, and they are all afraid of me. When my father was alive and they were having church convention, if I said I was going, he would say, I'm going to call everyone in the village to advise you not to go there. Because you are, every time you get to that place, even the bishop has a problem with you. How will you make heaven? You know, so we decided that we were going to have this meeting, and it took a lot of research for me. But there was this one female pastor who had socialized me on a verse, and the Riverside people are here. It's about Deborah in the Bible. She said, when you read that verse, it says Deborah was a judge, a prophetess, and the wife of. It did not say Deborah was the wife of. So, is it making sense, Ruth? Yes. She had a career, a call before being someone's wife. So we use that. We also use Esther, how she was able to, and since in our churches we're being told that women are not supposed to be political, we went back to the New Testament, and the version according to Leymah was that all of these things that these women did were political action. It was activism. I don't know how else you would call it. Someone like Deborah who rode with the men to save her nation. Esther, Rahab the prostitute, everything they did. So once the Christian women started listening to that, my trouble was now going to the Quran to find something that will empower the women. And then I phoned Khadija, the wife of the prophet. And I told them that if this woman was older than the prophet, she was a businesswoman. So in essence, he married her for her wealth. I don't want to be blasphemous, but look at it from the perspective of, if she had all that wealth and she could marry a younger man, it meant she had some political power. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to do that. But then also we had these women talk about their relationship. Eventually, we were able to trash out everything, and they sat in that room and signed a memorandum of understanding that everything that impacts our community, we will work together to change. Yeah.
Fantastic. I forgot to mention that you're supposed to be writing down your questions on the little cards and passing them to Bert or to Michael so that we can deal with those. But I have some other things to say, so I just want to make sure that you've all seen the book. Could you hold up the book? Right, hold it for everyone else. So it's called Mighty Be Our Power, and I would urge you to acquire it and read it. And I forgot to mention, because it seems so long ago to me, but there's an extraordinary movie that tells the story of Leymah's organizing in Liberia called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. It was, I think, the first movie made by Abby Disney, who has become an extraordinary filmmaker, well-known filmmaker, has been philanthropist since then, but I commend the movie to you very much. So, can we talk a little bit now about what you're doing? Besides jet-setting around and encouraging more and more women to do this work wherever you're called, and showing up for American Jewish World Service and the Jewish Theological Seminary and Bert Visatsky, but you have launched, or in the process, I guess you want me to say, of launching a significant program at Columbia, and I wonder if you would talk about it.
Definitely. You know, I've always been a dreamer, and my dreams are dreams that people do not necessarily understand. You know, like I'm crazy officially. So when I started doing this work, after I came to the Eastern Mennonite University and did my graduate study, I actually came to validate the work that I had done in Liberia. I don't know if it makes sense to anyone, but I wanted to know everything we did in Liberia, did it have a theoretical backing? Was it actual peace building? Was it nonviolent? Did they have a name for some of the strategies and the tactics that we did? So it was that quest to understand where I had been that brought me to grad school. And after 6 months, I think one of the best things I got out of that school was to expand my network. But I realized that every time they would say this, it would be like, but this is what we did. And, you know, and this is what we did. So then, afterwards, I realized that women at the local level doing peace work had very valuable lessons to bring into academia. And I wanted to do that. So for 5 years, Abby Disney, Peter Comer at the Earth Institute, and myself have been working to build this Women, Peace, and Security program at Columbia based within the Earth Institute. So December, we were finally able to trash out all of my crazy ideas and bring it home. So this is a program that seeks to bring local, high level, and academia together. What we're hoping to do, and what we did recently for the first time, was to bring into around the table women from the UN, women from within the Columbia school system, Georgetown, and all of the Ivy League doing women, peace, and security, around the table with Black Lives Matter, Asian Women's Network, Domestic Workers Union. Let's sit down, let's have a conversation as equals around issues of women, peace, and security. And let's find a common ground. That has always been my dream, because there is no disconnect in what we do. I'll give you a typical example. One of the mothers who came from the Association to Benefit Children said, I'm an accidental invitee to this event. Why? And she said, well, I don't fit in the Columbia system. I don't fit with the university people. I don't fit anywhere in this class of people that you have around this table. I just do work with children. I said, really? Let's investigate that further. So what do? Take care of their well-being. How? Usually they come to school, they're a little bit distressed, they're like this, because at home they've observed their mothers being beaten, and at home there are issues of this and this and this and this. And so as she was talking, I was smiling. Afterwards, she paused. And I said, you just explained the story of any mother in a war zone in Africa. So you're not just doing children, you're doing women, peace, and security. Because if the peace and security of their mothers are not considered or is a problem, that child's well-being is at risk. Oh, I never thought about it that way. Of course, even people in academia never thought about it that way. So when we want to research from Columbia or Georgetown or Preston, women, peace, and security, it's easier for us to fly to Mozambique and Liberia and not come to Harlem and the Bronx. And so this is the lens that we want to bring into this program, that whilst we're doing global, let's do local. Whilst we're empowering women in Africa to do research and to document their experiences, let's not forget, right on 125th Street, whilst we're doing all of these things, let's not forget Brooklyn. Whilst we're talking peace and security for women in countries where oil companies have taken over, let's not forget how gentrification is impacting communities here in the US and other parts. Whilst we're talking rural women mobilizing to sustain their communities, it shouldn't just be in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, in Ghana. Let's go to Seattle, Washington State, inside rural America, and see how women are sustaining their communities. So the idea of that program is bridging local work with academia, linking it to the UN, and linking it to other places. And I think it's groundbreaking, and I'm not saying it because I'm involved with it, but I feel like it's never been done in any academic setting. And so that's where we find ourselves. I've committed 5 years to the program. Afterwards, I think I'm going back to my country and cause more problems.
I will just tell you, having been at this meeting at Columbia, that although the focus, and I think the focus correctly, was on this bridging academia and activists, for all of us there who do sort of some avenue of local work or domestic violence work or international work, just the chance for us to talk with each other and say these efforts are all essentially identical was a really powerful part of the morning. So I thank you for the work.
Thank you.
And you'll accomplish it in 5 years, and some of us know what the trouble you'll make when you go back, and we're very happy. I'm going to go to some other people's questions, and then I'll probably ask a few more of my own. If there was a point when you felt overwhelmed and that you couldn't go on, what helps you to keep going and to believing in your work?
I always answer questions with stories. So every morning we used to go to protest, and I lived like 3 minutes walk from where we protested every morning on a big field. So I would wake up at 6, and the neighborhood boys would walk me to go, and I'll meet this old lady. She always beat me to it. I would say, okay, tomorrow I'll get here at 5:30, and she'll be there at 5 a.m. But she would be cold and no slippers, and her wrap, the cloth that she wrapped, would be torn, and it was always torn, and her T-shirt was not even white anymore. So one morning I got there, I decided to engage her. And fortunately for me, she spoke my ethnic language so we could communicate. And I said to her, why do you come here? You're cold, you're hungry, you're tired. And she turned to me and said, do you have sons? And I said, 2 boys. And she smiled and said, I had 2 boys. I lost one in the first war, and I lost one recently. And then I heard that you all had come, and people said you were going to bring peace. So I decided to come. You know why I come? And I said, no. She said, so that you don't lose your 2 sons. as the leader of that group, how do you give up? When people who have no reason to be there are sitting there. So I must admit that there were days that I would resign and go to my house, and in 10 minutes I would see 50 women sitting on my doorstep and say, you cannot resign, let's go back. And there were days that when I got really very tired and said, I can't go on, someone would come with oil, and that they've prayed over. And these women will form a circle around me and anoint my hand, my feet, my head, and say, God has called you to do this. And some days when I cry that I couldn't do it, they would tell me, do you know what leadership is? And I'll say, yes, the boss. And they say, no, the trash can. And these were women who did not go to school, but they were the ones who were schooling me in everything I needed to know. So their experiences, just the support that I got, kept me going.
Thank you. Some of these questions are very personal, so I hope you'll decide how much of them you want to answer.
Well, just read it, and I will skip over it, but sometimes when people, they want to know, I say, ask me anything, including about my love life, so.
Well, one of these don't quite go there, but this next one, which you and I talked about over drinks a couple of times, but it's like, how did you overcome fear of death, leaving your children behind, danger towards your children as a result of your activism?
I think one of the things that pushed me into doing this work at the rate that I did it was because my kids were in a refugee situation. So my sister and my kids lived in Ghana as refugees, and I was in Liberia. And I remember when they left Liberia, I couldn't go to the back of the house where they had their rooms and everything. So I would stay in the living room, in my bedroom, and for almost a year, I never ventured to that backside of the room. And I did everything. My kids knew nothing about the work that I did. I would just appear after 3 months for like 3 days, have everyone sleep in my bed, and 3 days later, I would jump and go back. So I was seeing them every 90 days. Death, yes, I thought about it. But I always told myself my sister was such a good mother. Maybe she would be the better person to take care of them if something happened to me. In 2008, when Pray the Devil Back to Hell came out, I took my kids to see the film when we did the premiere in Ghana. And I could see them holding on to each other. At the end of that film, my son, who's going to be 21 soon, said to me, Mama, why didn't you tell us? We always felt that you did not want to be with us. We didn't think. And the one who's 19 now, who was much younger then, said to me, don't you know that you could have been killed? I said, well, girlfriend, that's after the fact. But I've gotten questions from journalists about, don't you regret never being there for your kids? And I said, no. If I had to do it again, I would do it the same way. Because the one thing that I understand is that every piece of work that I've done is ensuring that my daughters do not have to fight as hard as I fought for my voice to be heard in my community. And if being away from them is what it took or is going to take to make sure that they have a space to express themselves, not just my daughters, but daughters in different parts of the world, including this country, I would do it again. Because I'm not going to live in regret and say, I did not enjoy doing what God gave me to do. There are many people out here who are qualified, overqualified to do what I do, but God chose me, and I have to do his work. So most times I say, you take care of my kids, and I'll take care of your business. So death has never really been a thing that frightens me. Sometimes I would sit with my colleagues when we used to do the work, and I say, what if someone just fired in here and I died? And the women would look at me and say, you know what? You are officially crazy. How can you say that? How can you die? And I'm like, anyone can die. And I have this one friend who says, do you know that I've prayed that I should die and you should rather live? Because I know that if you live, our work will continue and our children will be taken care of. So we had all of those moments where we thought about those things, but it never really pushed me. Now, sometimes I think about it, and I say, well, how many 45-year-olds in Africa have the opportunity of being a Nobel laureate, work with many people? Like one of the activists in Mozambique said, when we were there talking about the danger she was in, she said, well, if I die today, I would die smiling, knowing that all of you will come to be at my funeral. So.
Wow. And she now is taking care of 9 children. Several of her own are grown up. She's adopted a child. She's
I have a 5-year-old boy who's kicking my butt.
So this is one that I could answer in one word, and the answer would be it hasn't, but I think you should speak. But the question is, how has your identity changed or shifted since winning the Nobel Prize? And I think you should talk about the work you're doing with the laureates and the way you've used the prize.
Well, one of the things that I did immediately after winning the prize was to kneel down and tell God, keep me humble. Never let me change. I want to be that person who will remain the person that, so I don't like the fanfare and the glam and glitz and the every other thing that comes with it. I think one of the things that have changed is that my face has become a global face. But I try to go back home and keep the flame of my first love alive. And when I talk about first love, I'm talking about my drive to create change, activism. So when I won the prize, my group of friends said to me in Oslo, just before my Nobel lecture, so what will your legacy be? And I was like, don't you all understand that this is my legacy? I won the Nobel Peace Prize. And they're like, no. You're 39. You won the prize. You still have many more years to go. What do you want to do with this prize? And I said, I want to do education for girls. And I want to do leadership development for young people. So we started the foundation. And as part of the foundation, we decided we're going to pay school fees. And I was like, oh, it's easy, raise money, pay school fees. In 5 years, I've recognized that, no. And Robert, who started talking about something like that, it's not just investing in school fees. It's the whole person. You can't just pay a girl school fees and expect her to do well. You have to mentor. You have to nurture. You have to be able to know what is happening in her home. Recently, we learned that when we pay our girls school fees and give them their stipend, in less than a month, they're broke, because it's that stipend that they use to either pay a younger sibling school fees or to provide food for their family. So now we're beginning to imagine, how do we do the whole? Because it's not just enough for her to come from school and give you straight A's and come to an empty house where the mother is not working. So in doing school fees, we need to think about economic empowerment for the family, especially for the single mothers. We need to think about healthcare issue. We need to think about all of the different things. And more, as I think about it, I'm getting gray more, because it's something that I want to do. I want to invest in these girls. I want them to do well, but I recognize that I can't just pay school fees and let them go. So we're spending more of our time engaging them and trying to find better homes for those like the Ebola orphans who do not have a place to stay, find better boarding school for them. As a matter of fact, when I was in Liberia, we just signed an agreement with a local hospital to provide health care for not just our students, but some of the mothers who cannot afford. One student is in the final year of nursing school, and her mom got ill. Her only option was to drop out 3 months before graduation to go back to the village to take care of her mother. And I was like, hell no, come back to school. Just focus and leave it to me to go back to that village and find a network of women that we can empower to take care of your mother until you finish school. So this new work that I'm doing, talk about praying and God smiling with a sense of humor and say, you asked to be humble, I will humble you. And this is really it, because when you listen to the stories of these children, I'll quickly tell this story. I went to deliver the graduation, the commencement address for the first IT college in Liberia in March. And in March, my schedule, I said, was March Madness. It was my own madness. I went there, and after the program, security tight, everybody pushing, media coming, want to do interview. Husband trying to get me out of there because I had to go and do one other event, go to office, and then head for the airport. So I had all of this happening. Then I decided I'm going to my office to work for like 3 hours before going to get to the airport and go home. Sitting in the office, my assistant came to me and said, I have this folder I need you to read. Trust me, this assistant that I have thinks he's my last child. So he calls himself number 10. I say, hell no, you're not number 10. But he's the only one who pushed me. So he's like, madam, I think you should read this. And I said, no, my brain is on fire. He said, madam, I insist that you read this and you thank me later on. So I open the folder and I see the photograph of a young girl. And I see the first grade sheet. And her GPA was 4.0. Then I see the second grade sheet. The GPA was 3.7. And I see the third and fourth grade sheet. And so there was this dropping from 4 point. Then I got interested, but I don't want to meet this child because my brain, so I said, go outside and ask whoever brought this, why did she come from a 4.0 to this? And then he came back and said, okay, she said at this point, and this point is when she had an uncle who paid the school fees and she didn't have to worry. At this point is when someone paid half and she had to look for half. At this point, which is a 3.0, is when she left campus, went to town, and spent the entire semester trying to raise 2,000 United States dollars, raised it just in time to come back and sit exams, and still made a 3.0 GPA. So I just signed. And he said, what? I said, we'll pay her school fees. He said, just like that? I said, yes. Any other thing? No. He went. I said, okay. In an hour, I'm going home. 1 hour later, I come outside. I make a grand entrance into my office. And when I'm leaving into everyone's business. So I come out of my office with a lot of noise. So how's your girlfriend? How's your boyfriend? How's this one going? How your kid? Talking to everyone. And I turn, and this little girl is just standing there crying. So I said, did I offend you? And she's like, no. So then my assistant standing next to me and said, oh, the folder, that's the owner. And then I said, why are you crying? And she said, Madam Gbowee, you didn't even lay your eyes on me. You signed a paper to send me to school. And I said, you know what? Your grades introduce you to me. There's a lot of greatness in you, and I want to invest in that. She couldn't stop crying. I hugged her, got in my car, and passed. This last trip, I went on campus to meet my students. She was sitting there all bubbly and talking. Just received the first term thing, and it's 3.78. So I told her, you're still 2-point-something short. I want to see that 4.0. And she's like, I'm going to give it to you. But this is where I find myself. No lost identity. I think I'm more aware of where I come from. That's why I only wear a suit when I go back to Liberia to show them that I shop at Macy's and other stores in New York. But when I'm on the global stage, I'll dress like this deliberately because I want to always remember where I come from. Yesterday, I did an interview, and someone said to me, what's the significance of the Nobel to you? And I said, it's taken me 5 years to understand that when that prize was given to this name, Leymah Gbowee, it was not just given to me. It was given to every rural woman across the world, including rural America, because this is a name that is not common. When that prize was given to me, I recognized now that it was given to those who will never hold a microphone to talk about their work. When that prize was given to me, I realized that it was given to me for those women who break their backs every day to keep their communities safe. So the significance for me of this prize is that it is a prize that recognizes and acknowledges that ordinary grassroots women are also key players in making and shaping our world. That is the significance of the prize to me.
I'm going to call on you for a small piece of sort of political history, because someone wants to know sort of what happened with Charles Taylor and what was the change, and if you could just do a quick update as to the
Charles
state
Taylor
of...
he's presently in prison in London, and he's in prison for crimes he committed in Sierra Leone. He's never gone to court for war crimes in Liberia, because our peace process never really took into consideration of war crimes. Our TRC report, Truth and Reconciliation report, recommends a war crime thing, but the peace process did not take that. So Taylor is in prison in the UK for another 50-something years for crimes he committed in Sierra Leone.
And an update on Liberian politics.
Well, there's elections in October. President Sirleaf is not eligible to run anymore, so we have about 21 candidates trying to rule 4 million people. So it's an interesting time in Liberia. The reason why it's interesting is because the level of political awareness, especially amongst young people, you know, that we can make a difference. I feel very good about it. I'm optimistic about the future of the country. I don't think we're going to sit down and get any more tyrants to rule us, because people, especially young people, are much more aware about the political state of Liberia.
And when you go back, you can make some more trouble.
Well, yes, everyone thought that this year elections I would get involved in the politics of Liberia, and the one thing that I keep saying to people is that I love my work. That's the first thing. Those young people keep me looking good, because I have to compete with them, the ones that I sent to school. I have to compete with them for looking good, for staying alert, and for every other thing. But the other thing that I say to people, my faith is very important to me. And when they say, why are you not getting involved in the politics of Liberia? I say, 5 years ago, God, through his son Jesus, decided to give me a Nobel Peace Prize. 5 years later, do I go back to God and say, please make me president? He will say, you are not a serious person.
Good answer. I have a bunch more questions, including one or two for me for AJWS, which we're certainly not going to do now. I don't know if we'll get to any more of these, but Bert has a question.
You invited this. You wanted me to ask you about your sex life. So what I really want to know is it true? We have heard that one of the ways you organized the Muslim and Christian women in Liberia to stop the war was by threatening to withhold sex.
We definitely threw in the sex strike thing, but at that time, I think it was out of desperation for media attention. Anything sexy, anything violent, the mainstream media would pick on. None of the media entities out of Liberia was interested in putting our stories out there, including regional media entities. Once we said sex strike, everyone wanted us on their show. You know, and I've seen that over the last few years, a lot of women causes are using this sex strike thing, and they really bring them close to media attention. So that was one of the strategies that we use to get the word out about the work that we did. However, in the rural communities, the women were very, very strategic about theirs. They took their husbands to the churches and to the mosques and said to them, make a vow to God that you will not ask us for sex until the war has ended, because we have to fast regularly. And the men made vow. We didn't know this had gone on for a long time until we decided to end the protest after elections. So we go to this village to end the protest, and every man had rose, had a gift, had something. So I turned to the leader of the group and said, wow, you people are really lucky. When we ended our protest in Monrovia, no man brought us gifts. And she said, well, you don't understand what is going to happen in this village tonight. So I was like, what? She said, well, so you've come to officially end the protest. And so we have no more excuse for a sex strike. So tonight, so they have to give us presents so that it's really funky tonight.
That's a story I hadn't heard yet. Okay, I think we have time for two more questions. This one is personal, the other one is organizational. This one is it's an observation, but it asks you to comment on the fact that you spoke so powerfully about the importance of keeping your anger and our anger strong, but the person said, I only hear love in your voice. So could you comment on sort of anger and love as motivations?
Is there a bottle of water? Is someone with water? If there's a bottle, but let me just, I like to give this analogy. Anger is very fluid. It's like water. And when you get angry, you have a choice. In that moment of your anger, you have two containers in front of you, the violent and the non-violent. Don't worry about it, rabbi to be. Or almost rabbi. You have in front of you a violent container and a non-violent container. And I tell young people, including my own children, it's a split-second judgment where you pour your anger. If you decide to pour it in the violent container, your legacy would be that of a tyrant. If you pour it into the non-violent container, you're a king, you're a Gandhi. So when I speak to young people, I say, those in prison, you're not better than them. It was that split second, I'm angry, where do I pour it? And you decide, I'm pouring it in this non-violent container. I get raging mad. Girl, whoever wrote this question, I get mad. I went to Libya, and just the state of that nation after all of the NATO bombs, I was vexed for 5 days. Then I met 100 young people in a room, and I asked them, where do you see yourself in 5 years? They laughed in my face. And one of the young men said, why didn't you ask us 30 minutes? We don't even see ourselves. There is no hope for a future. They are living a hopeless life. And so then you get to see those who were raped, including men. And they've been sanctioned not to speak. They had been sanctioned at the time not to talk about it. So rape at that time, immediately after the crisis, was called a terrible thing. So girls who were raped were put in basements by their families because they were defiled. And if they dare try to come out, they were killed by those same families. And no one wanted to talk about it. Then they take me into a room and said, we want you to give a statement on the role of women in the transitional process. I walk into the room, all men, and the 10 or more women in the room were foreign ambassadors. I sat there looking at the paper that I had written, like the one Bert made me write and I didn't use. Angry and just like, oh my God, I'm losing it. So I climbed up on the stage. and deliver something that I thought right after this one, I am going straight to jail. But I ended my talk by telling everyone, including all of the president and all of the key people, because in that statement I mentioned rape so many times that they were uncomfortable in that room, and I think that was the first time anyone had mentioned rape publicly. And then I said to them, if you fail to take action, you're no different from the Gaddafi regime. And I left the stage. I thought I was the only vexed one. There was another doctor who had gone to do work, so the two of us had gone in by request of the Italian government. We were going to the airport, and Dr. Abulash was so angry that he kept complaining and complaining and complaining. So I was like, okay, doc, you have to leave this anger right here and go Canada to your kids feeling better. But by the time I went back to Liberia, they had called me to say a bill had been drafted to deal with sexual violence and assault. But the reason why I'm telling you this is that whilst you hear love, I also do have a lot of anger inside that I tend to put out in my work. So I say it's the thing that keeps whilst I pour it in a non-violent container, most time it is the fuel that I use to keep going. It's that thing that is ever before me, all of the negative and evil things that I see, that reminds me of how much work that we still have to do in the world that we live in. So yes, while anger is neither good nor bad, it's our split-second decision on where we pour it. If you pour it in a violent container, hate and negativity. One last thing I will say is that when you do the work, or if you have recognized the power that you have in you to do what you do or to make change, you can never allow bitterness to sit in your heart because it pulls you back. So you have to always, my sister, just before I came, was telling me about someone who had done such wrong to me, and why did she come into my house and see me keep such a lovely company with the person? And I said, well, she said, oh my God, you're so forgiving there, it's annoying. But I do not have that space in here or up here to deal with bitterness. And if you want to, you have to move away from it.
Folks, we can't possibly end on a better note. Leymah has talked about problems. Thank you. The applause is wonderful, but you applauded too fast, because I want to make sure that you heard both that last exhortation and the listing of problems that Leymah gave us before that are both global and local, some of them less than a block from where we sit. You can feel angry, you can feel desperate, you can feel concerned, but the question is whether you will pour your feelings into the right bucket and take action and make the kind of difference, or try to emulate to make the kind of difference that Leymah Gbowee is making in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, and good night.